So episode 1.
Episode 1.
Yeah.
This is the iPad?
Oh, no, we have our own.
Oh, yours?
What? Alright.
No.
Oh,
Yeah,
just
we can bring all the cameras
Oh,
next time, yeah.
Is that somebody's back?
That's fine.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'll do it.
Okay, guys, welcome. We're here at the Patent Professor headquarters, and our program today is Patents and Prototypes. And I'm here with Matthew Bordy of Prototype House. I've known Matthew for years, and he has a good understanding of where prototypes fit in with patents. So today we're kind of just gonna talk generally some questions that come up that I get all the time. And we have our Director of Client Relations here. He's monitoring the chat, so if you have comments or questions, just post them there. And you can always jump in and ask us. This is kind of an informal opportunity for inventors, manufacturers, those that have questions about prototyping. We have Matthew here with lots of prototypes that he's brought in, that he's worked on. And sometimes inventors have worries about where prototyping fits in the patenting sequence. So if you have those, I can talk on that as well. So Matthew, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come in today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. And I did bring a few examples. And so Prototype House, we're in Fort Lauderdale. We're really near the Patent Professor's headquarters here in Coral Springs. And if you have a question online, I urge you to ask us for guests here in person. Also, go ahead and raise your hand and feel free to ask us any questions. So it's more of an open dialogue. So, I'll kick it off, John, and ask you, when do you feel is the ideal time to, think of a prototype when you first have an idea?
Okay. No, great question. And I want to start with why I think there's a myth out there of running to the prototype first. And a lot of people might not know this, but at one time, in order to file for a patent, you actually submitted the physical prototype. And if you can imagine, right now we're up to 11 million patents, and there's patents on humongous things like aircraft landing gear. And just imagine if that was still the requirement to have to actually prepare that prototype and then submit it. That requirement went away very early on. So today there's no requirement to file a physical prototype with your application. So my advice generally to inventors is to focus on protecting the idea first before you start working on a prototype, because you never know if you're reinventing the wheel. It might be something that's already out there. And I don't know if you've seen some of that. I'm sure you've had inventors come in with an idea, and you may have already know it exists.
Oh, yeah. There's actually one idea I'll tell you about. We have people come in all the time. We're in Florida, and everybody has lanais. And they come in, they have this $1 million idea. It's amazing. And it's basically a plastic cover for the edging of the lanai. So when landscapers come, they usually tend to cut the lanai. But it's patented, and there's a lot of people that come up with this. So I think that brings up a really good point. So when clients come to us, and they're not that far along, I think it's really important for you guys to contact John at the Patent Professor, do a thorough patent search, and then file for that provisional patent. So you get some initial protection, and then you can start working with a product development firm like Prototype House, where we'll start going through some iterations of prototypes. And then your product may change during the prototyping process, where then you can give those updates to John, and he can update the patent application before it turns into a utility patent. That's what I
mean, and I can understand why someone would want to try the prototypes first, because this goes back early on in my career. I had a client with just this amazing, beautiful stainless steel blade for a lawnmower, and it was, I even feel bad calling it a prototype. It was like a finished product. And And what it would do, it would have like horizontal blades and a bunch of vertical blades on each. If you think of a fan, each fan blade having a bunch of vertical blades. So when the grass is cut horizontally, it's also cut vertically and just comes out like completely minced. And we did a patent search, and it is like just devastating to find almost like a knockoff, like something as if, you know, as if someone had read his mind and it was his exact idea. And this prototype cost about $8,000. So I think, you know, one of the nice things I like about the way Matthew works at Prototype House is initially, you may not always jump into a full functional working model prototype at that cost. There's ways to do things with, and you can talk about that, like injection molding or.
Yeah, injection molding comes a little further down when you're ready. But for example, you know, initially we'll start off with some ideation and concepting. Sometimes clients are not ready to file a patent right away on their idea because they're not sure exactly how to make it work. So if you're not sure how to make it work and you're not sure on the materials, you're not sure on the final, you know, how you're going to make something work, we can help you ideate, do a little bit of research on what mechanisms could make it work. And then we can give you even simple sketches and a good illustration of how it will work. And then you can go with John prepared to explain, hey, this is how we think the product's going to work. This is what the idea is. This is why it's different. Can we do a patent search on that? And then it's a minimal investment for us to do the initial ideation and research. And then if, you know, John's team comes back and says, hey, unfortunately we found, you know, a few devices that are exactly the same, maybe you can change it, or, you know, think of something better, then you didn't spend a ton of money and you feel better moving forward. But I think every entrepreneur should, you know, think of that when they're about to embark on this journey, because it's expensive, and you have to, you know, be prepared to for those no's, you know. And I think some clients don't want to. They believe in their idea so much that they don't want to do that, and they'll be devastated later.
Right.
So that's one way to, you know, make sure that you don't have a devastation like the lawnmower blade.
Right.
Because I can't imagine how you had to like console them leaving the office
Yeah,
a little bit
and
that day.
you know, and the question like, what, you know, oh my God, why did you? Because you want to know if it's a new idea before you work on creating a prototype. And I said, well, why did you create this prototype at this cost? And the answer, like, is something all inventors grapple with, because I wanted to make sure it worked before I protect it. I want to make sure I have something worth protecting. So there's different ways of making sure it works. One is, of course, you create a full working model and at a huge cost. But the other is to get a provisional patent filed, which will protect the general concept, and then go to a prototype manufacturer like Matthew, and they've done this for so long and so much experience, they don't have to actually try everything to figure out if it works or not. So they can, a lot of the developing can be done just mentally without putting even pen to paper, and certainly before putting money into molds and other things for prototyping. So you can do that, and what the provisional patent allows you to do is you have a full year to fine tune the idea. And we've had ideas that have been patent pending, and we've had clients go over to Prototype House and work with them. And when it comes back at the end of the year, there's some really new, novel improvements that were not in the original patent. And that's okay, because the original patent was a provisional, so we can include that new stuff and then convert it. So that, I think that's kind of an iterative approach to working. And if, you know, for those inventors that think that they're at some severe disadvantage because they have to improve the product in a bunch of series. I mean, look at like what Apple does. I mean, like what
Apple,
what
Dyson,
right?
Yeah.
Like all of them. Like I don't even know what iPhone we're at, like 11, 12, whatever it is. In fact, sometimes they'll launch a product and have 2-3 weeks later, like a recall or an update or something, because everything seems to be perfect on paper and on the drawing board, and then when it's launch, they find that there's something missing. So that's why I'm a huge believer in the provisional patent, but you really don't, after you have filed, it's to your advantage to not rest on the concept of the idea the way it's filed and work on trying to see if there's additional tweaks that you can make.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you peace of mind because in the US it's first to file. So, you know, it's better to file sooner than later if you want to protect your idea. And you don't have to worry about it because you have that filing date and it gives you that peace of mind. Otherwise, if you don't file, you're always wondering, you know, did someone just file something similar? So we actually had a story where we had, I won't mention names or the product, but we had a entrepreneur we were working with on a concept, and he just wanted to move forward, going straight to production. And then they had somebody in the same industry, one city over, that filed a patent for that exact product. And he definitely came up with it first, but I think, you know, people talk, you never know who you're sharing your ideas with. And even if it's like a family member, you know, everybody talks. So, and then, you know, someone might take your idea and twist it a little bit, and they think it became their idea. And that's just human nature a little bit. But I would recommend, you know, get your filing date. It gives you peace of mind, and then we can build upon that.
So that brings up a great point. And those, you know, I've been doing this a long time, like 25 plus years, and for most of my career, the U.S. patent system was on a first to invent system, which means whoever can prove that they had the concept first and worked diligently on the idea until filing, that's all that was required to get patent rights. And that's why a lot of the early advice is to have a laboratory notebook and document the date of your idea. If you do your own prototyping initial work, and you go to Home Depot and buy supplies, keep the receipts, because that's proof of when you had your concept. All of that went out the window in 2013 because the U.S. patent system switched from a first to invent system, in which you had to prove you invented first, to a system that's first to file. And that's what Matthew was talking about. Under first to file, you want to be extremely careful on who you discuss your idea with. It sounds terrible to say that it could be a family member or a close friend, but being as an attorney, you end up seeing the worst cases, and you'll see ideas that have been taken by spouses, former spouses, kids, parents, friends. The key is to get it protected as soon as possible. Get that filing date, because today first to file is all you have. At one point, I mean, so today, even if you had a video recording of you creating the invention with documented evidence of having created it first, that's not going to help you in court if somebody else files the application first.
So no more writing a sketch and mailing a letter.
Yeah.
I still have clients today that say, well, I mailed myself a letter. You can't do that anymore. But that used to be proof. It's postmarked and.
It used to be, because that would prove your date, of what date you had your concept. And what inventors would do is, you know, the post office would stamp it when you would have a date. And then to just try and make sure that there's evidence that the envelope hasn't been tampered with, they would sign their name right on the edge of the flap. So that if someone opened the envelope and then took the contents out and replaced it later on and resealed it, you would have like experts in court testifying that this envelope has been opened before. All of that, the entire industry, at least as far as proving inventorship, is gone, because now it doesn't matter how much evidence you have of inventing first. It's all about filing the application as soon as possible.
So, you know, talking about that, I get this question with clients a lot, and I just want to put it out there for anybody who's listening that may have that question. So let's say I filed a provisional patent. Should I still have people that I speak to, like if I wanted to pitch my idea at a tech accelerator, should they sign a non-disclosure?
Yeah, so it's always helpful as extra protection. It's not necessary. So the reason for doing that is if you file a patent and you get them to sign a non-disclosure agreement, if your patent ultimately doesn't get granted, then you can fall back on the non-disclosure agreement. What I'm always careful when providing that advice is the other way around is not really that safe. So if you rely on just a non-disclosure agreement, you're taking a risk because a non-disclosure agreement is basically, it's a contract, and contracts are enforceable between two parties. And that's all a non-disclosure agreement is. Like, party A agrees not to disclose the idea, and both of them sign. But if party A gives the idea to their second cousin, or even further removed, like just a distant friend, or an associate at an unaffiliated company, then the entire burden is on the inventor to prove that the leak happened through the person that signed the contract. And if they do sue the person who's actually brought the product to market, that person could legitimately testify in court that A, they don't know you, they've never spoken to you, never written to you, have no idea who you are, and as far as all you can sue them for is a breach of contract, but hey, I have no contract with you. So don't rely just on the non-disclosure, but if you have a patent pending, there's no harm to additionally having a non-disclosure filed.
So it sounds like it's good to file a provisional first and get that filing date.
It looks like
Because
there might be a comment or question from the live stream.
Matt, can you go over just what is kind of the process of prototyping, if from the initial when they speak to you, once they have filed their provisional patent application, kind of the process so that everyone can kind of get a more understanding?
Absolutely.
Just a quick summary of the question first.
Quick summary. Absolutely. So if when a client comes to us and they have a brand new idea, they file their provisional patent, they're ready to jump into development, it really depends on the type of product you have. So we just finished a product for a physical therapy product, and it's a lot of cut and sew and it has some plastic parts. And then we have other products like medical devices that are mostly like metal and plastic. So it depends on the material and it depends on the product and the complexity. So we also do products where we have to design, electronic PCB, printed circuit boards, and things like that. But initially, we'll start off with a really base crude prototype after we do some research and some ideation. So for us, we won't just start building a prototype right away. First, we'll want to ideate and figure out what is the aesthetics going to be on the product. What is it going to look like? How are we going to make it function the way it's supposed to function? Because at the end of the day, you want a prototype that works. That'll be frustrating if you're developing something and sometimes the first prototype doesn't work, and that's part of the process too. But so we get the aesthetics down, and we'll come up with a few different design concepts, and we'll work with our client to hone in what that final concept's going to look like. And then we'll usually, if it's a physical item like plastics or metal, we'll take that concept and build a 3D CAD model. And that will give us all of our dimensions, how we're actually going to build the prototype, and build out a plan of all the parts. And then we'll have a discussion with you and say, hey, are we going to 3D print the initial parts? So here's a 3D printed prototype of a bottle washer, and this called for flexible material because these arms will expand in a glass and be able to clean all the inner surfaces without a lot of effort, and it has a suction cup at the bottom. So for a simple prototype like this, we use a 3D printer with a TPU material, and we took a silicone suction cup from another product. We put it together, but it's a great way to prove the concept. And then after this prototype, we understood that we needed to make it a little bit bigger, that the bristles need to be a little bit wider, and the cost is not that expensive. So we may go through 3 or 4 of these iterations before we get to a final design to go to production. Here's another prototype of a yoga product, and it started off with some sketches, and I wish I had the first prototype with me. It was a really crude cutout, prototype with EVA foam using an X-Acto knife, but it proved the point. We got some good dimensions. This was the secondary prototype that we use a heat press. So most entrepreneurs wouldn't have access to the different equipment that we do to be able to prototype certain items. And then this was the final product. The Yogizi. I don't know if you could see it, but this EVA model is, nearly perfect. It has the embossing of the logo, also in the back here, and it has the patent number. And John actually did the patent on this product, so I brought this one today. And so to kind of go back and answer your question, it really depends on the product and what phase in development they are. But usually the first prototype will be a little bit crude because we're just testing sizes, testing materials, and then you can go a little bit further. And I have this prototype here. This one we took the PCB board out, printed circuit board, but this is a centrifuge that actually spins blood, and it's completely working prototype, all 3D printed, including the casing. And this is a great way for us to test the unit before going into production. So the motor and the steel plate was all CNC'd. We're using the exact feet that the production unit would use. And then here is the production unit. So after we have a high quality functional prototype, we can then go to production and know that all the parts are going to fit together and it's going to operate as intended. So I have one more example if you guys can see it. So this is a sanitizing bracelet that you wear on your wrist. So this would have been great, pre-COVID. You can sanitize your hand in the hospital and things like that. But initially, after we did the 3D CAD model, we did a really rough 3D print just to confirm the size and the aesthetics. And this is really inexpensive. I mean, under $50. So you can see what it's going to look like. From there, we created some soft molds, and we created this prototype that was the first functional prototype that you could actually wear on your wrist. And after some modifications, I think we did 6 prototypes total before the client went to production, and then this is the production model. So it's very similar to the final prototypes, but we went through a few iterations. And that's more or less the process. The cut and sew, if you have a cut and sew item, I just want to touch on that. If you have a cut and sew item, it's much easier to get to final production. So for cut and sew items, we usually will go through the design process, create some die lines and technical drawings for you, and then order samples directly from a factory. So your samples will be closer to your end product a little bit faster. Yeah, hope that answers. Thanks for listening, guys. That was a spiel.
And there's so much, I think, Matthew, that you covered that shows the importance of several steps along the way. You mentioned patent number, I think, on one of these, on this right here.
On the back.
So, yeah, so anytime you go into, for the inventors, if you go into a store and look at physical products, if they're patented, the reason the patent number is put on is because it eliminates the defense of innocent infringement. And an infringer cannot claim, or if they claim that, hey, I didn't know that this product was patented, just so you know, like, not knowing that it's not patented doesn't prevent damages and in court. What it does prevent is punitive damages, so additional damages. They're called, in the legal sense, treble damages, like triple damages, to really punish the infringer. But if the plaintiff or the inventor has not put a patent number, then the defendant can avoid those additional damages by saying they're an innocent infringer. There's still, the patent holder is still entitled to payment, but not those higher punitive damages. So that's why patent numbers are put on. But I want to just discuss briefly, and that if you work with a prototype manufacturer that's familiar with the patenting process, there's some products where the packaging is really the best place for the patent numbers instead of the product, because it's more likely to be seen. I'm trying to think of examples, but like Play-Doh might be an example. Play-Doh's a trade name for this children's toy. You're not gonna, there's no way to put the patent number on the dough itself, so you put it on the packaging, you put it on the box. A lot of times now, and we can talk about that also, prototyping has changed from physical products to software and applications, and that's a big part of it. So how do you there's no physical stamping of patent pending on software, but you certainly can have in the footer of the website an indication that it's patented. And you don't have to wait until, I oftentimes will see inventors come in that have had their prototype made somewhere, not a prototype house that doesn't indicate that there's the patent pending, and I'll ask if there's a patent pending, and the inventor say, yes, there is. Well, it really needs to be shown on the prototype, especially if you're gonna show the prototype to others. Patent pending accomplishes the same thing that the patent number does. It puts anybody that sees it on notice that that you have a patent on file, and that eliminates that incentive for them to rush and try to protect first, because they see that you've already beaten them to that first to file step.
That makes sense. And talk about packaging, you know, I think packaging could also really be protected. So a lot of larger brands and entrepreneurs, I think, overlook this a little bit, and I always push our clients, if you have really innovative packaging, you should file a patent on it. Because, you know, Home Depot, for example, the tool industry, my prior life, I developed a lot of products for Home Depot and Lowe's and skilled workforce and things like that. And a lot of the patent infringement or the infringement were on these cool cases and packaging. So if you think of a cool package or a cool way to present your product, I would recommend also, you know, filing a patent on the packaging as well.
Yeah, like the quote, like, it's not just the steak, it's the sizzle. Well, sometimes the sizzle is what's selling the product. So you may want to patent the steak, but patent the sizzle as well, because that's, otherwise a competitor may have a different product, but very similar packaging to yours, and may be able to confuse consumers as to the quality or origin of the product.
Absolutely. Frank, we have another question.
Yeah. John, can you go over kind of, let's say we sometimes get clients that do a utility patent with us, and then later we recommend also a design patent. Can you go over why that would be important, and also, Matt, how you could also help with the design, let's say someone that's just doing a design patent application?
Yeah, so, sure. Well, I'll start with utility versus design. There's so much confusion over the two. That utility means use, and it's a patent that protects the particular way an invention works. And I think the best way to explain that is with an example, and then I'll talk about designs in the same way. So say you develop a new type of belt, and it's got, like, it automatically adjusts. So say after like a heavy
good turkey dinner,
good turkey dinner after on Thanksgiving, you don't have to be at the table embarrassingly loosening the notches on your belt. You just sit there, and the belt should, you know, hopefully not too loud. It just clicks, and you get a loosened belt. And then later on, it automatically senses that there's extra play there, and it will tighten up. That's a use, that's utility, and you want a utility patent on that belt. But so you just have this really unique belt buckle that does this, and this thing catches on, not just for the utility of it, but say this belt is $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. I'm just making this up. Now it has an additional benefit in that people are wearing it. Yeah, it's great, it adjusts, but the real reason they're wearing it is that they want to be seen wearing a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 belt. People would recognize that. Now, if all you've protected is that automatic use, that feature of tightening and loosening, a competitor, and you haven't protected the way the belt looks, a competitor could sell a dummy belt that just does nothing, doesn't work, but it looks exactly like your $4,000 belt, and they could sell it for 20 bucks. And believe it or not, maybe it's a sign of the times. People will be purchasing that $20 belt because it looks like it performs, and they're buying it not for the purpose, they're buying it for the look. So as an inventor, you always have to be cognizant of that. Like, why are people buying your product? Is it really the function, or is it that the look that they're that they really like? If it's both, and that goes back to that question we had in the comments that Frank brought in, is that's where in times like that we would recommend both. So with that hypothetical belt example, you want to get the utility patent because you want that unique feature protected, but you also want a design patent so that competitors don't sell a competing design. And this was a hypothetical, but it's ended up being there's a real product And like I said, I'm older, so I remember like back when cell phones were first developed, it was extremely expensive to have a cell phone, and a lot of times they would call it a car phone because you had to have your car customized.
Big blocks.
Those big blocks, right,
Yeah.
from like the Motorola original phones, and you could tell who had a phone in their car because there's this humongous like antenna thing on the vehicle. And if you look, there's some old movies where they show like a limo or something, and someone making a call from the limo, and it was really novel, and you could tell, oh my God, this car has a phone in it because of this antenna. Well, there's a company that capitalized on that and said, you know what, there's a market for, nobody's actually going to go and ask somebody, ooh, let me see your phone. So they sold a plastic dummy stick-on antenna that didn't do anything. It's just, you know, and they just, you peel off the back, and like $9, you stick it on top of your, hopefully a nice car, so it seems real, right? And like a real clunker with this would kind of look odd, but it's a somewhat nice car. If you add $9 to it, and the perception value for that owner has just increased the value, and they just drive around with this plastic dummy antenna. So that would be an example of where you want, you know, they miss the aspect of the design in addition to the utility. So hopefully that answers the comment that we had on that.
And as far as for us, you know, a design patent usually we would recommend when the product is final, because the design sometimes changes. So we may have one design when we first get started, and then we prototype and change it again. So I would maybe, you know, I would speak with John and see, because I think, you know, a design patent, it really needs to be exactly what the product is, correct?
Yep. So when we have those, a design and a utility, a lot of times the utility patent can be obtained and should be filed right away, because as soon as you have the concept of how it works, and the ultimate product sometimes may not look anything like the drawings in the utility patent. And that's perfectly fine, because the drawings in the utility patent are just supposed to show one example of how the idea could be made and used. But it doesn't necessarily have to look the way the idea is used. The design patent, on the other hand, as Matthew said, you want it to be as close of a match as possible. So you delay the filing of the design patent. Now, because the US is on a first to file system, you want to get that utility in, still want to get that utility patent in first. So it takes a bit of juggling, but it's always, you do need to have a patent attorney that understands the prototyping process, at least the fundamentals of it, and you need someone that's working on the prototypes to understand where patenting fits in, because if they send you to an attorney to get a design patent on an early, as Matthew mentioned, the ideation phase, then that would be wasted funds. And a good patent attorney would catch that and ask if this is going to be a final version. And if not, then a design wouldn't be appropriate right then.
Yeah. Well, we've had clients come in, and they come in with this booklet and research, and it's like this beautiful laminated book and with a design patent, but they haven't done any development. And so it's a beautiful line art, but unfortunately sometimes then once we get to development, the product changes and they have to, you know, refile. So I think it's important to know what you're getting yourself into in that regard.
So I have another question for you guys, okay? So it says, if I have an app idea and I want to do it, but I don't have any information, know how to work software, what should I do? Should I first build it out? Like, how do I build it? So that's kind of the question. And also, I guess for John, is from the software side, how do we protect that? I know you talked a little bit about putting the patent number or patent pending on a website, but if I'm developing an app, how would that work?
Okay, so I'll talk about the patenting side real quick, and I think a lot of that's going to be for Matthew, but you can get a patent on 4 types of general statutory classifications: a machine, an article of manufacture, a composition of matter, or a process. And the process is where software patents come in. Historically, processes, when you think about patenting, you would think of a process in a factory for creating a product. series of steps, say a bicycle frame that's stronger than any other alloy that's out there, because during manufacture they cycle the heat, so a manufacturer might want to protect that with a patent, and that's how most processes work. Now software fits directly within that category, and I just want to put to rest, there's a myth out there that software is not protectable and you can't patent software.
I hear that a lot.
That's not true. We get software patents all the time. They have to be written in a way where it's not an abstract idea and you're solving a tangible problem, and it's kind of a specialty area of ours to protect software. So if they're done right, you absolutely can protect software with a patent. Now, part of the question was, which do you have, if you're not a programmer, do you have to have the code before you can see a patent attorney and protect it? And the answer is no, because you don't really want the specific code protected. That's many times so detailed that it's going to give you really narrow rights, because a competent programmer could create something that does the exact same thing using even a different language. If you use COBOL, they would use C++ or Fortran or something else and accomplish the same goal. So for a software patent, we want the bird's eye view, the 10,000 foot aerial view of what your general process is, and you don't have to have the actual code. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matthew on when you need the actual code, what's the next step?
Sure.
And you have that patent pending with a provisional patent protected, then how do you get from that to an actual working app?
Well, so our approach for applications and also like online software and things like that, we usually sit down with the entrepreneur, and which would save you a lot of time and money, is if you actually sketch it out. And it could just be what's called wireframing. You can do it by hand, there's wireframing online, but really think of the flow of each user that is going to use your app or application. Like, what is your customer going to do? Is there a sign-on page? What's the end result if they click what button? Do you need a super admin? Do you need an admin? Do you have a manager's page? Do you have a back-end dashboard and panel? You know, think of, you know, what you want your app to do and all of those different screens and functions, and try to lay it all out. So we usually have this big whiteboard that we put up, and then we'll just start illustrating everything. And then you start thinking a little bit more as a user, and then you figure out all the features, and sometimes you think of new features that the app could do during that process. But when you document all of that, then you have a features list, and you have everything that you need for the app to do. So you know, hey, do I need to connect to Google? Do I need to connect to GPT? You know, what kind of API do they have? And you start doing research. And then you have a good frame of mind what your app is going to do, and then we can understand how long it will take to actually develop, and then break it up into phases. Usually the first phase is start, you know, developing some of the databases and starting the UX and UI. So those are, you know, what your app is actually going to look like. If you want any cool features like an icon to spin, things like that. So we usually do a first run of low fidelity UX and UI. Low fidelity just means they're maybe just grayscale, but with the actual graphics for the client to approve. And then we'll do a high fidelity, which is like full color, full images, all the icons are designed, but then we have a roadmap to follow. So we have all the wireframes. So usually after we do that brainstorming and all the UX and UI and we have the wireframes finished, we'll say, hey, go file a patent, because everything is thought out, and from that 10,000, you know, bird's eye view, I think you have a good understanding what the app does. Because a lot of times when clients come to us with an app idea, I notice that they really don't know, they just know one function, but they don't know everything else about the app. So it's a good way for you to do your research. And there's tons of online resources to learn how to do wireframing. They don't have to be pretty, they could be scribbles. But just for you to start thinking of how the app will work, I think it's really important. And if you have any questions, you can email us. We're friendly. You can chat with us. Do you have any other questions?
As of right now.
That's good.
So I think in closing, if someone wanted, you know, clearly if
Enzo?
yes, I have a question.
Of course, sir. I had a question about, now, I don't know if this is relevant, because I don't know the field too well. International patents, are they easy to get? How do you handle them? If you could talk about that, that'd be cool.
Sure. So this is a question on international patents. So how do you protect the idea outside of the United States? The beauty is that under international treaties, there's the Patent Cooperation Treaty. Once you file an application in any member country, the United States obviously is a member of the Patent Cooperation Treaty, you kind of freeze your rights internationally for up to 30 months, in some cases 31 months. So you don't really want, as an inventor, it's a great question, but you don't have to rush forward immediately and start filing applications and it's really costly throughout the world. You file in the United States your initial application. It can be a provisional or a non-provisional, and then you have 1 full year to decide if you want to file for international rights. And at that point, you can file what's called a PCT application or a Patent Cooperation Treaty application, and that will then secure your rights for 30 to 31 months. Before the end of that time period, we decide which specific countries to file in.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Enzo, great question.
Yeah.
So just before we close, clearly if you're seeing this, you're probably on the Patent Professor website, so you know how to reach us. But Matthew, if someone wanted to reach Prototype Houses,
Yeah, they can give us a call. It's 1-888-IDEA-DEV is our direct phone number, or you can call, reach us online at prototypehouse.com, or drop into the office, have a cup of coffee with us and come chat. You can reach me directly. My telephone number is 954-612-1991. Feel free to text me. I'll text you back. And thanks for listening today. If you have any questions that come to mind, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer.
thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.